Next inductee, Racine Thompson.
Well, they always say the best for last. Coach Bennett told me, he said, no, Racine, your name happens to be at the end of the alphabetical order. That's why you're last. Yeah, I just want to say, I'm probably the happiest person in this room. You know, being 5'3", Michael Rodney Dangerfield, you just can't get much respect. But I want to thank the committee for their selecting me to receive this prestigious award. I want to thank several people here. Coach Bennett, for one. He's the one who nominated me. And his wife, Diane, she did all my paperwork. And for Coach Archer, I'm sure he had a part to play in this. And for all my friends that came out today, you know, I was surprised, like I said, to see so many here. And I want to thank them and all of my colleagues. And as a matter of fact, I have two of my doctors here. And I guess they came, they thought maybe if I couldn't make it through, that they could do something to help me get through. And I want to thank Coach Bernie Balstick and Donnie Shoup for their letters of recommendation. And most of all, I want to thank my wife, Doris, for her support and dedication for the past 58 years. I always said she raised 3 daughters and a husband. And probably more than anything else, I felt like, because of my dedication to my job, that I was a part-time dad and a part-time husband, because I was always at the school where I was employed. And also, my wife and I have always attended the state wrestling tournament. And it always would fall on the week, our anniversary would always fall on the week of the state tournament. This past year, we had 2 anniversaries, because the wrestling tournament was a week later. So thanks, Coach Archer, for doing that for me. Appreciate it. And I want to thank my 3 daughters that are here with me. Janine, she's the oldest. And Jennifer and her husband, Daryl, and her daughter and my granddaughter, Alexis. And our youngest daughter, Jamie, she's at a medical convention in Chicago. She couldn't be here, but we have our 2 grandchildren, Aiden Hayes and Jillian Marie Hayes. I grew up in the late 50s and graduated from Woodrow Wilson High School in 1960. My dream was always to be the head wrestling coach at Woodrow. Of course, I don't think Coach Bennett or Coach Powell knew that, but that was my lifetime dream. And back in those days, traveling was difficult. There were no interstates. The only thing that we had in West Virginia was the turnpike, and most people called it the death road, and that's about what it was. And anyhow, most of the teams that we wrestled were all from down in the southern part of the state. And we did wrestle William Fleming High School out of Roanoke, Virginia. And at that time, today, we wrestled the Virginia Tech freshmen. And of course, we would really take a licking from them. But anyhow, after graduation, like a lot of young people at that time, didn't have any money. So I went to work, and I started taking classes at Beckley College. And it seemed as though, like I said, things went pretty slowly for me. And I took classes during the day and worked in the evenings and earned money for my college tuition. And I want to fast forward to my senior year at Glenville State College. Happened to be right at the end of the school year. They posted a head wrestling job in a county nearby, and to me that just suited me. So I go for the interview, and the superintendent of the schools was adamant. He wanted a wrestling coach. He didn't want a football coach, or a basketball coach, or a baseball coach. He wanted a wrestling coach. And I said, oh, that's just right down my alley. So all during the interview, he was very positive toward me. He asked a lot of questions, and I thought that I answered them quite well. But anyhow, to make a long story short, he told me, he said, before the conference was over, he pulls out some applications in one hand. There must have been somewhere along about 10. And then he held mine out and he said, son, that's what he called me. He said, your application is on top. Well, you know how I felt. I knew that I was going to get that job. So I come back to school and I called my wife. I said, Doris, I said, start packing our bags. Of course, our bags in was nothing clothing. But anyhow, I said, make sure that you do start packing because we're going to move to another county. Well, a friend of mine had told me that, you know, or I told him, don't get too excited. I said, but I'm going to get that job. Well, lo and behold, the next week, a friend of mine there at the college came up to me and he said, Racine, I understand you know a lot about wrestling. And I said, well, you know, my friend's name was John. I said, I know a little bit. And he said, well, he said, I said, what do you want to know? He said, well, would you work with me? I said, sure. So to make a long story short, I asked him, why are you interested in wrestling? He said, well, I just got the head job in the county in which I had applied. He said, I've never seen a wrestling match, whether high school or college. And I thought, well, there we are. And you talk about a young man who was almost destroyed, and I was. But my wrestling background taught me one thing. You persevere. Now that day I got pinned. That's how I felt. And I know that I had to call Doris and tell her that not to pack anything, that we weren't going to this particular county. So I learned my first lesson in educational politics. Here's what happened. John told me, he said, my friend told me, he said, Racine, the reason that you didn't get that job is because the superintendent of the schools and John's grandfather were best buddies. So therefore, you know what happens. But anyhow, that was a stumbling block for me, but I said, no, I'm not going to give up. So Doris and I, we moved back to Beckley. And those are here know where Crescent Elementary School is located. I taught there for 7 years. And I taught math in the 5th and 6th grades. Now my degree was in secondary education. Now back then, I think, of course, Dr. Mendes can tell you, the personnel laws were quite different then. But anyhow, In the meantime, I was there for 7 years, and I was working on my master's degree in educational administration. And again, my dream was to be the head coach at Woodrow Wilson. And in 7 years at Crescent, I can remember the job came open, Coach Powell, 4 different times. And I was never the successful applicant. And you know, I kept thinking, what am I doing wrong? But I kept plugging along and plugging along. And after the vacancy appeared about 4 different times, that was about the 7th year at Crescent, the superintendent called me and he said, I want you to go to a particular high school as a principal. Well, it kind of blew things out of proportion for me. But I remember an old saying, you know, the scenery always remains the same as whenever you're following the lead dog. So I served as principal at 5 Raleigh County schools, ending up at Woodrow Wilson High School in 1986. I get hired on Thursday evening. The teachers come on Friday. Saturday and Sunday, we're looking at Labor Day. On Monday, the former principal hands over the keys to me. On Tuesday, 1,800 students roll on the campus. And you talk about a lost ball in the tall weeds. I was. And I had reservations when I went home that evening. Of course, I told my wife what I had transposed. But I said to myself, you know, am I the man for this job? And all during the evening hours, I kept pacing the floor and saying to myself, you know, wrestling taught you, you don't quit, whether big or small. You don't quit. So I said, hey, you know the old saying, if you're going to run with the big dogs, you got to get off the porch. So I did, and I stayed at Woodrow for 23 years, for 3 years, and spent the next 23 years in the central office as an assistant superintendent. I really never reached my goal as being the head coach at Woodrow, but I had the opportunity of working with Coach Powell and some of the other coaches and so forth. A lot of those coaches, like I said, that got the job that I didn't get were good people. Not just good people, but good coaches. I never reached my goal, but today I have far exceeded my expectations, and now my dream has come to fruition. Thank you.
like that.